The terms nation, country, and state are often used interchangeably, but they do have different meanings. So let's tackle the term state first. A state is a region or territory that is administered by a sovereign government. States have their own institutions, both governmental and non-governmental, and the ability to make their own laws and decisions without interference from a foreign or superior body. States have the right and the responsibility to defend their borders to ensure the safety of their people. A nation is a group of people who have commonalities, usually a language, culture, and traditions. When we think of a country like France and we ask ourselves what it is to be French, we may think of French food, baguettes, croissants, pastries, escargot, and wine, or we may think of some of its great monuments like the Eiffel Tower, the Arc de Triomphe, or the Louvre. We may also think about some of the great traditions such as sidewalk cafes, the Tour de France, or skiing in the Alps. Obviously, we're going to think about the French language. All of these things together represent the French nation. It's important to note here that a nation is a people and the state is a territory and government. A nation-state is a combination of the two. A group of people who have a common background, ancestry, or culture who also share a government that administers the territory of that particular people. Administering a state that includes multiple nations can be incredibly difficult. Looking back to the Romans, one of the primary causes for the fall of the empire was that it was territorially overextended and included people of many nations. Germans, Dalmatians, Greeks, Spaniards, and Gauls all had their own cultures, traditions, and institutions, and they did not necessarily enjoy being ruled over by the Roman people. The two kingdoms of Austria and Hungary joined in 1867 to create the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Austrians and Hungarians are very different. Their languages are not even in the same language family, and their empire encompassed several other nationalities including Romanians, Slovenians, Czechs, Slovaks, Croats, Bosnians, and Serbs. This experiment only lasted 50 years and broke apart following the empire's disastrous loss in World War I. In 1989, Czechoslovakia broke from the influence of the Soviet Union in the peaceful Velvet Revolution. 4 years later, Czechoslovakia, which had originally been created following World War I after the breakup of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, itself broke in what was known as the Velvet Divorce. They separated into two separate nation-states, Czechia, which is Bohemians and Moravians, and Slovakia, which is the Slovaks. A bit of a rivalry exists between the Czechs and the Slovaks, and although their languages are fairly similar, the two groups have distinct languages and felt as though their futures would be better off without the other. Perhaps the most notable breakup of a nation-state occurred in the 1990s and could not be resolved without a major war. Yugoslavia had also been thrown together following World War I. It was a mix of several different Slavic peoples, including Slovenians, Croats, Serbs, Bosnians, Kosovans, Montenegrins, Macedonians, and Albanians. Only a man named Marshal Tito was able to hold the groups together. After the fall of the Soviet Union and upon his death, the country began ripping itself apart. The three major factions were the Catholic Croats, Orthodox Serbs, and Islamic Bosnians. An estimated 140,000 people lost their lives in the series of wars for independence on the Balkan Peninsula. Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic was charged as a war criminal following a program of genocide and ethnic cleansing against Islamic Bosnians. The long history of troubles on this peninsula has led to the introduction of the term Balkanization, a situation in which different groups are constantly at war or at a constant risk of conflict. A lesser-known instance of nationalism threatening to divide a state is the example of Canada. Canada is a combination of two very distinct and rival cultures that over time came to be one state. The province of Quebec is French and clings to its traditions, language, and culture, especially in the eastern part of the province around Quebec City. Most of the rest of Canada, the Maritime provinces, Ontario, the Prairie provinces, and British Columbia, have a deep English background. The two cultures do not always coalesce, and in 1995 a referendum was held to determine if Quebec would become an independent nation. The no vote received 50.58% of the vote, and we 49.42%. Quebec remained a part of Canada by just over 54,000 votes out of 4 million votes cast. More recently, Scotland voted by a 55-45 margin to remain part of the United Kingdom. In fact, the UK is one of the few states that has managed to maintain unity across several nations. The UK is comprised of England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, four areas that have traditionally had little in common, but have more recently worked out their differences and found peace through their unity. An important aspect of any government is where and who power is distributed to. The most common type of government across the world is the unitary form of government. The United Kingdom is one of the best examples of this. There are counties and councils across the four nations of the UK, but the bulk of the decision-making for the entire country takes place in London's Parliament. Those counties and councils provide a backstop to Parliament for tasks which are too difficult or inconvenient for the ministers to carry out, but the powers of those local authorities are derived from the central authority itself. In recent years, the UK has decentralized some of its power by granting the Scottish Parliament more and more authority over Scotland. The effectiveness of a unitary government may be limited by the size of the population or the size of the state. The largest nation with a unitary form of government is China. All decisions for that nation emanate from Beijing, with local authorities taking their direction from the Communist Party. A national government of that size will tend to have difficulty responding to the needs of all of its people, particularly in China, where minority groups such as the Tibetans, Mongols, and Uyghurs may have little to no representation or decision-making authority. In a nation the size of the United States, centralizing power in one national government is not practical, and as has already been mentioned, China distributes power in this way through the Communist Party, but it takes an authoritarian government to pull it off. And the Chinese Communist Party is not necessarily worried about the needs of its individual citizens. Under federalism, power is divided between the national authority, the state or provincial authority, and the local authorities. In the U.S., the primary function of government is to protect the liberties of the individual. And in order to accomplish that, it must create an environment where its people can thrive. By decentralizing government to local municipalities and state governments, Americans govern themselves in the most efficient and effective way. City and county councilmen, mayors, and managers possess a much greater connection to the people of their community and can therefore make better decisions pertaining to the particular needs of the community in which they reside. The general rule is as elected officials represent smaller and smaller populations, the response to those populations will be greater, quicker, and more efficient. There should be less waste, both in terms of time and resources. Odds are you're never going to have an audience with the President of the United States, but you can talk to your councilman or mayor to air your grievances or offer your suggestions. Another benefit of federalism, in addition to the effectiveness of the response of local governments, is to use the idea of the petri dish. Each state or municipality creates laws that reflect the values of that community, as long as the laws do not violate the rights of individuals living within that community. And they may experiment with new laws or methods of governance. Depending on the results, these local and state governments can continue to implement them in the future, revert to an older and more effective way of carrying out the business of governance, or move on to another experiment. Other municipalities benefit from watching the experiment unfold and can then decide if they also want to implement any changes or carry on with more traditional forms of governance. The benefit to the people is that in the case of the United States, citizens have 50 separate petri dishes, and the states have thousands upon thousands of municipalities among them. So Americans have a lot of different places to choose from, and the odds are one of those states and municipalities aligns with their values, their ideas about the involvement of government in societal affairs, environmental policy, business policy, etc. If you prefer a progressive democratic way of life, then the Pacific Coast or New England, with New Hampshire being the exception, may appeal more to you than an area of the country that prefers a more traditional and conservative approach to life and government like the South and Plains states. As an American, you have the right to vote with your feet. Pursue your own happiness. In addition to these benefits, the states and local communities provide a check on the power of the national government. If either believes that the national government is usurping their constitutionally protected powers, they can sue the offending party in the national government and have the dispute resolved in court. Now, the original form of government for the United States was in fact a Confederate form of government under the Articles of Confederation. In this system, power is nearly completely decentralized to the states and local governments. The central authority exists only to resolve disputes, provide protection or a military alliance between the participating states, and/or for free trade purposes. The states retain their sovereignty as states and cede a fraction of their authority to the small centralized government. Confederations more closely resemble an alliance between nation states than the confederation existing as a nation state itself. Aside from the early United States, the Confederate States of America and the European Union are other examples of Confederate forms. Members of the European Union remain sovereign states, with their own militaries, national borders, customs, languages, and governmental structures, but they have surrendered some of their authority for enhanced trade and exchange. This includes giving up their own currencies to create the euro and allowing European Parliament and its agencies to create trade policies and negotiate trade agreements with foreign powers. And although borders remain on the map, physical borders have been dismantled to allow for free movement within the EU. Issues within the EU have cropped up recently, with the United Kingdom leaving the EU through Brexit. The majority of British citizens saw ever-increasing regulations on trade, governance, and particularly the enforcement of borders as a threat to British sovereignty. With 33.5 million ballots cast, the Leavers outvoted the Remainers by a 52-48 margin, bringing about the much ballyhooed Brexit. Talks of an Italian exit as well as the French exit have also been bandied about. We have so far discussed where power is distributed. Now we'll take a look at who it is distributed to. The three major types of governmental power are the legislative, executive, and judicial powers. Power is split between the three branches to guarantee that no one person or branch takes too much power. This is known as the separation of powers. The branches also have the ability to check the others to ensure that power is not usurped from one branch to another. Examples of checks include the presidential veto, Congress's ability to override the presidential veto, and the court's ability to rule acts of Congress as unconstitutional. These collectively are known as checks and balances. The legislative authority is the power to make laws. In representative government, this is done through a legislative body like Congress or Parliament. It's known as a Duma in Russia or a Knesset in Israel. The executive authority is the power to enforce the laws created by the legislative body. The executive branch is generally headed by a president, chancellor, or prime minister. Under the highest executive authority are the secretaries and agencies to which he or she delegates power and authority to carry out the legislature's laws. This includes police and investigative powers, as well as regulatory powers, which is overseeing laws designed to make businesses operate within what are considered to be normal societal parameters or boundaries. In this diagram, we can see the breakdown for the delegation of executive authority in the United States. The president sits at the top with the vice president located directly below him. Many of the vice president's roles are ceremonial, but the president may appoint him to lead task forces for important issues. He may also delegate those responsibilities to the various departments and their department heads, known as secretaries. All of these departments together are known as the president's cabinet. Each executive department has multiple agencies within it that are tasked with specific responsibilities related to government powers. Here you can see the Department of Defense is singled out. The Secretary of Defense is the head of the department, which is headquartered at the Pentagon. Reporting directly to SecDef are the Undersecretaries of Defense, the Chiefs of Staff of the Army and Air Force, the Chief of Naval Operations, and the Commandant of the Marine Corps. The Joint Chiefs of Staff are comprised of the aforementioned positions and report directly to the President and SecDef. Under their purview are the various military commands, including Central Command, or CENTCOM, which is headquartered at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa. CENTCOM runs all operations in the Middle East, which includes the U.S.'s involvement in the Gulf War, the Iraq War, and the war in Afghanistan. It is the central player in the war on terror. Also highlighted is the Department of Homeland Security, the newest cabinet-level department. DHS is comprised of several offices which carry out the day-to-day functions of administration, including press releases, lawyering, and training. The agencies carry out the mission of the department and include the Border Patrol, Federal Emergency Management Agency, the Coast Guard, Customs, the Secret Service, and the TSA. It's also important to note that there are government agencies that are department or cabinet level in stature, but operate outside of the departments. The CIA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and the Small Business Administration are examples of these types of agencies. Although these agencies are somewhat independent, being that they are not attached to any particular cabinet level department, the heads of the agencies are appointed by and report to the President. Before the agency director can take his or her position, he or she must be confirmed by a majority in the Senate, and Congress retains oversight of all of these agencies. This means that they can hold hearings and appoint independent inspectors to look into any wrongdoing at the agency. The judicial branch is the last of the three branches, and its responsibility is to interpret the law. The federal courts gained the ability to determine the constitutionality of acts of Congress through the case of Marbury v. Madison in 1803. The judiciary carved itself a new power that it does not necessarily possess through the Constitution. At the bottom level of the federal judiciary are the district courts. Any cases that meet the requirements for a federal case will start at this level. Once the case has been decided, the loser may appeal the ruling to the next set of courts up the ladder, which are the appellate or appeals courts. There are 12 appellate courts that hear cases from specific regions of the country. The appellate court for the region of Florida, Georgia, and Alabama is located in Atlanta. The loser of a case that goes before the appellate court may appeal to the Supreme Court of the United States. The Supreme Court, which has 9 justices, sits at the top of the federal judiciary and is located in Washington, D.C. All rulings issued by the Supreme Court are final unless the court decides to take up a similar case in the future to determine the constitutionality or the wisdom of previous decisions. The court does overturn itself on occasion, the best known time being Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, overturning the earlier Plessy v. Ferguson decision. In Brown, the court decided that separate but equal is decidedly not equal. In the case of the United States, the legislative branch is the most powerful of the three branches. One of the major forms of representative democracies is the parliamentary system. Parliamentary systems are found throughout the world, including the UK and several former British colonies that include Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. The British Parliament is broken into 2 houses, the House of Commons, which is elected and from which the Prime Minister is selected, and the House of Lords, which are inherited positions. The most significant aspect of a parliamentary form of government is that the executives are chosen from the legislature. In parliamentary elections, each party seeks to gain a majority of the parliamentarians or ministers. If a party successfully gains a majority of the seats in an election, then they will have a majority government and will install a prime minister as the head of the government. The prime minister is the supreme executive authority. The majority party will also install its own members as the ministers of departments as well, such as the Minister of Defense or the Minister of Education. In an election, when no party is able to reach a majority, parties will seek to form a coalition government. 2 or more parties will agree to work together and split the ministerships in order to achieve a majority of the seats in Parliament. Coalition governments can be tenuous and difficult to manage because parties with different views on issues must work together and compromise to keep the current government afloat. A prime minister who loses a vote may have a vote of no confidence taken against him or her. This can lead to a new round of elections and the formation of a new government. This will give any opposition parties, those parties who are not in the majority or in the coalition, to gain seats and possibly form a new government in which they will have ministerships. In the English Parliament, the rules for decorum are not quite what they are in the United States. Ministers often heckle and call out as the Prime Minister or other ministers are speaking. This is perfectly fine and often entertaining.
There's only one person I can remember round here knifing a foreign secretary, and I think I'm looking at him. Yeah. There we are. What we need to do, both in Britain and Europe, is to combine the fiscal deficit reduction, which has given us the low interest rates, which we wouldn't have if we listened to the muttering idiot sitting opposite me. Calm down, dear. Calm down. Calm down. Listen. No. Listen to the doctor. Right honourable gentleman sitting opposite enjoys a game of bingo. It's the only time he ever gets close to number 10. But I would like to highlight something the Shadow Chancellor said this week. He said that he would be tough on the deficit and tough on the causes of the deficit. As he is one of the causes of the deficit, I think we've just found the first ever example of political maso-sadism. His Shadow Chancellor was asked on the television, could he think of one single business leader? And do you know what he said? Do you know what he said, Mr. Speaker? He said, Bill somebody. Mr. Speaker, Bill somebody's not a person, Bill somebody's Labour's policy. And make sure we get better choice, faster wheelchairs, and ones that actually, faster. We get the wheelchairs a bit faster. And the rumour that somehow I don't love Larry, I do. And I have photographic evidence to prove it. The last thing I'd say is that you can achieve a lot of things in politics. You can get a lot of things done. And that, in the end, the public service, the national interest, that is what it's all about. Nothing is really impossible if you put your mind to it. After all, as I once said, I was the future once.
Presidential systems differ quite a bit from parliamentary systems. In the United States, the executive branch is completely separate from the legislative branch, save one exception. And that exception is that the vice president casts the tie-breaking vote when any ties exist in the Senate. The president is not elected by or from the Congress. Instead, he or she is elected by the people through the Electoral College system. Unlike the UK, the president cannot be removed from the White House unless articles of impeachment are issued by the House of Representatives and a vote for removal is taken and won in the Senate. As in the British system, the American legislature is divided into two houses, the House of Representatives, which is considered the lower house, and the Senate, which is considered the upper house. The two houses have their own rules as constituted by the houses themselves. During the 2010 State of the Union speech, Representative Joe Wilson of South Carolina caused a stir when he yelled, "You lie," at President Obama in regard to the Affordable Care Act. Other examples of countries with presidential systems include Mexico, Brazil, Kenya, and most of Central and South America.
There are also those who claim that our reform efforts would ensure illegal immigrants. This, too, is false. The reforms I'm proposing would not apply to those who are here illegally. It's not true. And one more misunderstanding I want to clear up. Under our plan, no federal dollars will be used to fund abortions, and federal conscience laws will remain in place. Now,